Let me just say, meeting and getting to know Maddie has been an absolute pleasure for me. She is wise beyond her years, an exceptional and thoughtful leader, and an excellent example of what a Concordia liberal arts education can produce. Welcome, Maddie.
It's been a real honor to get to know Faith over the last couple of years and her role in putting together these wonderful luncheons, as well as just the excellence that she brings to Concordia from her own past experiences. It is also an honor to introduce our speaker today. I was a student here at Concordia in the 1990s, and Tracy Moorhead and Deanne, when President Dovre came back for his first interim role as president. And then just a few years ago, I had the opportunity as a community member to work with President Dovre during his second term to help establish a philanthropic gift from the Berry Foundation, this auditorium, as well as the Berry Scholars Program. And it was just really thrilling to get to work with him as a community member, but also to work with him as a staff member, and especially to be a student here at Concordia College while he was president. So most of you probably have your own stories about President Dovre and know him quite well. And so I thought I would give two perspectives of President Dovre for people who may not know him, and they're stories that I use when I'm out in the world, in places that Concordia is a little less familiar, and Dr. Dovre is less familiar. And so one of them, or they both come from when I was a student at my master's program at the University of Oxford in England, the area where, there are dreaming spires. And while Oxford was a wonderful institution, I couldn't help but reflect about my experiences always about what made Concordia even more special. And I did a paper on level 5 leadership, a Jim Collins focused principle. And so if any of you are business people, I would describe Dr. Dovre as a level 5 leader, someone who is humble and thoughtful and positioning the institution for success beyond his years. I hope that if you don't know about level 5 leadership, that after today you will go and look it up and really see how he embodies this completely. And we are so lucky to have had him in this community because of that. The other way that I would describe Dr. Dovre for someone who doesn't know him is to be a little bit more imaginative. And I can't help but think of probably the most imaginative school in my mind is Hogwarts. Hogwarts is a fictitious place, but anyone who has read any of the Harry Potter books knows that you could see yourself as a student. You might be Harry, you might be Hermione, you might be one of the professors, but there is only one Dumbledore. And Dumbledore is wise and bringing perspective to his institution, but also to the wizarding world. He is brilliant, and he is fun and engaging. I think what made Dumbledore so special in the J.K. Rowling books was that he started off as a student at Hogwarts. And so his commitment to that institution, to those students, to the faculty, to that community was because of how he got his start. And I think that's what also makes President Dovre so special, is that he is the one president from this institution that graduated from here too. And for anyone who doesn't know him and knows a Dumbledore, I think that is a pretty awesome thing to have the virtues of someone like that. And we have that here. It is an honor to introduce you to a level 5 leader in our very own Dumbledore, Dr. Paul Dovre.
Thank you, Marty. It's humbling to be introduced by a former student in such a gracious way. I have to say that coming to leadership for some people is a matter of strategy and drive and meeting a goal. And for me, coming to leadership was really more serendipitous. I didn't have a game plan. It sort of happened over time. Now, some of the consequences of coming to leadership that way are positive, and some, let's say, are not so positive. I mean, in my early years as president, it wasn't always so positive. I think of the first year, reminiscing with Marty about this just this week, the first year, just pretty well into my presidency, there was a student one night under the influence of some kind of spirits coming across campus about 1 a.m, shouting at the top of his voice, "The president is a fool! The president is a fool!" Now, we had security on duty, of course, and they apprehended the student, and the student was brought before the student tribunal and found guilty and fined $10 for disturbing the peace and $100 for divulging a campus secret. I've talked about leadership in the past, usually about a specific aspect of leadership. It wasn't until Faith called me sometime in the fall that I've ever had the occasion to reflect more generally on my leadership experience. So I wasn't sure what that was going to look like, but here I am, and I feel as though I've learned something in the process. I'm going to talk about these three sort of categories today of leadership, about faith principles and leadership principles and organizational principles. These three are, of course, inseparable, and I hope that will be clear as we go along. I began by talking about the faith principle. I do so because the premise of the Lorentszen Center is that our faith influences everything. And I believe that, and that's where I began. And I'm a person of the Christian faith, so the ideas will reflect that experience and those convictions. By the way, on your table there are some outlines if you find that of value going along. I may or may not be able to manage the technology today, so I thought for your benefit I'd have the outline as well. The first of these principles is what I call the creation principle. Martin Luther said, "I believe that God has created me and all that exists. God has given and still preserves to me my body and soul, my eyes and ears, and all my members, my reason, and all the powers of my soul." That statement is really the foundation of my faith and my view of the world. I know now I have a proclivity to mess up God's world through guile and cunning, and sentiment sometimes clouds my judgment. There are occasions when I lack the courage of my convictions. Those occasions are seared in my memory. I have been satisfied with convenience when I should have gone outside of my comfort zone. In the words of the Apostle Paul, the evil that I would not, that I am sometimes inclined to do, and the good that I should do, I am sometimes inclined to postpone. All of this is what Martin Luther called original sin. It's a reality that leads me to the second of my faith principles, and that is redemption. In his explanation of the second article, Luther wrote, "I believe Jesus Christ is my Lord, who has redeemed me, a lost and condemned creature, bought me and freed me from all sins, from death, and from the power of the devil." You might refer to this as the grace principle. It is the source of soul cleansing and peacemaking and life-changing. This grace is inexhaustible. and we're never out of reach of God's mercy. This mercy, I have discovered, as I'm sure you have too, is often mediated by others, by my family, by my friends, by my colleagues, sometimes even by strangers. They are people who often show me the way to a fuller life through their example, their good counsel, and their forgiveness. That leads to the next faith principle, which is gratitude. Gratitude for God's creation and for God's mercy. After writing about the many gifts of God's creative activity, Luther wrote, "For all of this, I am duty-bound to thank, praise, serve, and obey him." It's about gratitude. It's a push, if you will, from within my soul. It's about the joy of participating in God's work. Now, I've been using the words of Martin Luther here, and that's my tradition. But if your tradition would be St. Benedict or St. Thomas or St. Augustine or John Calvin, you would find perhaps not the same language, but very similar ideas to the ones that I have voiced. Principle 4 has to do with vocation. Some use the word calling, and that's a good word too. I believe that I am called to care for my neighbors and to care for God's creation. As one who is grateful for God's abundance, I am eager to accept God's call. And the Gospels express that call in many different ways. Feed my sheep, cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. Or one could turn to the blessings of the Beatitudes, the additional specificity of our callings as peacemakers, as comforters, as givers of mercy, as those persecuted for righteousness' sake. Vocation is getting a lot of attention today in both secular and sacred settings. The best book I've read on leadership in the past year is David Brooks' book, The Road to Character. He writes, "No good life is possible unless it is organized around a vocation. A vocation is not found by looking within and finding your passion. It is found by looking without and asking what life is asking of us." Brooks offers an extended critique of the self-actualized approach to vocation, one that emphasizes success and status and winning and inner passion. He refers to the self-actualizing person as Adam 1. Adam 2, in contrast, works to love intimately, to sacrifice self in service of others, to live in obedience to some transcendent truth. While Adam 1 wants to conquer the world, Adam 2 wants to obey a calling to serve the world. In the words of Frederick Buechner, Adam 2 asks, "At what points do my talents and deep gladness meet the world's great need?" This is an ennobling vision of life and calling. But I must bring some reality to all of this nobility, which leads to this fifth principle, contingency. Life is complicated. I am complicated. My calling is complicated. My vocation gets messy, for, as I noted earlier, I am in a certain kind of bondage. And then there's that wonderful Lutheran discovery paradox. I can't get it all done, so in choosing one thing, I'm neglecting something else. And in selecting one strategy that will be of help to my neighbor, I may disadvantage another neighbor. Think about downsizing or taking advantage of technology. Customers may be better served, but neighbors may not be. Must I choose between keeping my business profitable and serving my neighbor when in reality, I can't do the one without the other? In the midst of my vocation, there is a cross. Inconvenient, but inevitable. The cross is central to the Christian story, exemplified in the suffering and death of Christ, which events we observe this Lenten season, and then foretold to us by Jesus, who said that we were to take up our crosses and follow him. A cross appears when the budget doesn't balance and there are human consequences. A cross appears when I must confront an employee who is my friend because of his or her ineffectiveness. A cross occurs when there is dissension in the workplace and no obvious compromise. A cross appears when, for reasons of confidentiality, I cannot explain my actions to a doubting and critical public. In my early years of leadership, I had difficulty resolving the paradox between my feelings and my calling. I would be personally anxious about a decision, fearful of the conflict and criticism that might ensue in response to a decision that I was called upon to make as dean or as president. But I finally came to understand it wasn't about me, or my feelings, or my desire for approval, or my escape from a certain kind of personal grief. It was about the college, about its well-being. Without a healthy, stable, effective college, the mission could not be accomplished. I struggled in coming to terms with that kind of paradox. I've often told emerging leaders how important it is to claim the office to which they have been elected or appointed. If you are the dean, the community needs to have you discharge the duties of that office in spite of how it may feel. If you think leadership is going to be easy or without conflict, redirect your calling. Or as Harry Truman said, if you can't stand the heat, you ought to get out of the kitchen. Whether you are the assistant dean or the comptroller or the president, the same principle applies. So it can get messy. How to deal with such messiness, with so many contingencies, which leads me to this sixth faith principle, transcendence. And I'm one behind. Or am I one ahead? There we are. I believe that God is at work in the world. We are not lone rangers. We are not castaways on an island of loneliness and despair. I can access God through prayer and confession, through God's word and through the lives of the saints, and through deliberation, not just any kind of deliberation, but typically moral deliberation. These practices became more or less staples in my daily life as a leader. Luther's counsel to those caught in paradox of the sort I mentioned earlier was to engage in all of these practices. In addition, he said, it was prudent to seek the counsel of friends, people who share your commitments, who think with comprehensive wisdom, who work with diligence and out of a passion for the neighbor. And such deliberation will also often include the counsel of people who hold different views than you do, people who may disagree with you fundamentally, but they too can be a source of great help in a time like that. And finally, I get to the principle of accountability. I have been called to be a neighbor. No more than that, I've been called to love and heal and seek justice for my neighbor. This implies to me an ethic of excellence. If I claim my calling, I must also claim its obligations: to teach well, to heal effectively, to provide efficient service, to keep people safe, to provide a quality product, and the list goes on. After all, my God and my neighbor are calling on me to do my best. And if that's not good enough, to find someone else who can do it better. Holy prayers and beautiful melodies will not excuse my lack of proper stewardship in behalf of my neighbor, for piety is never an excuse for mediocrity. I believe that God will forgive my shortcomings, but God will not spare me the temporal consequences of my failings to my neighbor, which could lead to failing in my employment. I don't want to wish to close this discussion of faith principles on such a somber note, because remember, we are loved, we are redeemed, we can be renewed in our spiritual lives and in our vocations, and many of us have been. We know that there are many people who can claim that kind of gift in their lives. Now when we talk about some leadership principles, the first of these is discerning our gifts, naming them and claiming them. I know this goes against the grain of our militant modesty, so if you must, keep your list to yourself. But I just emphasize how important it is to name and claim your gifts. My skills for organizing and analyzing and communicating had a lot to do with the way in which my vocation has played out. I think it's also good to know what you're not so good at, what your deficits may be, and how to deal with that. The popular theory today is that you lead and serve out of your strengths. I don't disagree with that, but I also think it's very important to know about the areas where you are not strong and to develop appropriate strategies to deal with that. Maybe you improve in those areas, or maybe you find other people who can fill in those blanks. I think it's really important. David Brooks, whom I mentioned earlier, wrote this book, and he cites a number of well-known figures in history to illustrate his argument. His examination of their lives includes consideration of some of their personal and leadership deficits. Dwight D. Eisenhower had a ferocious temper, which he learned how to control. Dorothy Day dealt with her self-indulgent lifestyle through a life of rigorous religious discipline. George Marshall did not excel academically, but he did excel at neatness, organization, and self-control. And Frances Perkins, the longtime Secretary of Labor, overcame her personal reticence. She's a very shy person. She overcame it through her commitment to a greater cause. And the list goes on. It was my experience as a leader that my leadership skills were not a great strength. My relationship skills were not a great strength. I didn't read people as well as others. I often neglected to show sufficient appreciation to people for doing good work. I often lacked patience, and my wife will tell you I still do. My political skills diminished over time, which I think is somewhat inevitable. I sought to improve these skills, and I came to depend on others to fill in the gaps. I was always on the lookout for people who would bring to our team gifts that were not already abundant. As Warren Buffett said, it's better to hang out with people better than you, pick out associates whose behavior is better than yours, and you will drift in that direction. Principle 2. No matter where you serve, it is essential to cultivate key habits and values. There's a whole lecture here. I won't give it. But I'm referring to habits like reflection and listening and patience and discipline, and values like respect and transparency and honesty and compassion. To be self-aware and explicit in understanding their importance and their role in your life. And I think with that kind of an awareness, one is positioned then for the discerning of one's calling. It begins by seeking clarity on that earlier question, what is life asking of us? What is needed now? And where and how can I best serve my neighbor? It may be motivated by a push when we're told that our gifts don't fit the current position and so we are out of a job. Thank you very much, but goodbye. Or by a pull, a kind of persistent sense that you belong in a certain job at a certain place at a certain time. Or by a tap on the shoulder when people whom you know and respect tell you where you are needed and why. Or by the gracious serendipity of the Holy Spirit in which you simply find yourself where you are most needed. Early in my life, I experienced a long, tortuous sometimes period of discernment. Some told me that because of my experience in youth ministry, we called it Luther League in my days, and my academic and speaking skills, I should be a pastor. And I thought about that. Frankly, for several years. On the other hand, I'd grown up on a very successful farm, and that was intriguing to me. And then there was a faculty mentor who said, have you ever thought about being a teacher? So I waffled on all of this until I was spending a year at Luther Seminary, and I discovered that my vocation, that my calling to serve my neighbor could be lived out in a number of different places. just one thing. It could be in a number of different places. And what I needed to do was to pay attention to my gifts, to the counsel of my wise mentors, and to the things that brought me joy. So I found my way into teaching and eventually leadership roles in the academic world, and it's a vocation that continues to unfold in my life in new ways and new stations. Let me talk next about partnerships. We call this commonly today collaboration. I simply cannot envision leadership as a one-person show. The needs of my neighbors require gifts beyond my own, so I need partners. That is not to say I lay off my responsibilities on others, but that I depend on others, if you will, to carry out my core responsibilities. Jim Collins, author of the best-selling book, Good to Great, offers sage advice about having the right people on the leadership bus and having them sitting in the right positions. Halfway through my presidency, the members of our leadership team all took the Myers-Briggs inventory, and we spent one afternoon discussing the findings and the implications. Frankly, we became a much stronger team as a consequence because we were self-consciously leveraging our strengths. And it worked because of the power of a common culture and a common cause. We were loyal to each other because we shared essential values and commitments. The last leadership principle is renewal. We know in today's world there is all kinds of stress on leaders. The Great Recession has compounded those stresses, and leader burnout is all too frequent. It's instructive, I think, to recall that Jesus would take occasional leave from his ministry to escape the crowds and even his co-workers. We are told he would find a quiet place, a place for prayer and for reflection. There is almost inevitably stress in our vocations, and that is why more attention is being devoted these days to maintaining healthy lifestyles and cultivating practices of spiritual, emotional, and intellectual renewal. I could not imagine doing my work without the quiet times for meditation and prayer, without the stimulation of colleagues from other places, without the resources of a joyful and supportive family, without the infusion of new insights from the things I read and the concerts I attend, and without the respite and renewal of our lake cabin. That takes me abruptly to a discussion of organizational principles. It begins with the formation of an organizational culture about which a great deal is being written these days. And that culture begins with clear mission and clear values to shape the environment and the conduct of the enterprise. There are several tools that are available for this today, and I find them really very useful. So we've lost power. I was saying there are a lot of tools one can use now in trying to get information in front of people, but they don't always work. Yeah. But organizational culture is really critical, and the centrality of mission and values. Concordia is blessed with this really strong, vibrant mission statement to influence the affairs of the world by sending into society thoughtful and informed men and women dedicated to the Christian life. This mission generates our core values and is our most valuable asset. There's simply no doubt about that. And when I was president, I believed that my first and foremost responsibility was to uphold and nurture and extend that mission. The second principle is the Hedgehog Principle, which I've also drawn from the work of Jim Collins. Interesting idea. He says an organization needs to be clear about what it does best. That's its hedgehog. Now, a hedgehog might be likened to a porcupine. Porcupines move very slowly and very deliberately. They are clumsy and awkward, but they have those quills. and they always seem to be able to accomplish their task. A hedgehog, this is a way of simplifying a complex organization by identifying what makes that organization successful. It may take some time to sort that out. It may not be obvious to an onlooker or even someone on the inside. For example, Walgreens, after a long period of time, figured out that its hedgehog was having a drive-in pharmacies at convenient locations. How simple. And Starbucks' hedgehog was providing a simple, high-quality menu, again, at convenient locations. Concordia's hedgehog is combining liberal arts and the practical arts, or if you will, the liberal arts and career preparation. The synergy created by that juxtaposition is magical, and our graduates recognize and embody it and celebrate it. It works. And the college is always upgrading and fine-tuning and moving this in new directions. It's about knowing what makes you successful. That leads me to the next principle. Where are we here? Well, see if I can catch up. The generative principle. We're back. That is the encouragement and creation of new ways to enhance the mission of the enterprise. Now, setting these two, hedgehog and generative, together, you get a little paradox here, right? It's a very Lutheran thing to do. But the generative is very critical. Collins points out that great organizations foster a productive relationship between continuity, the hedgehog, and change. They're always picking their own brains and the brains of others. Max Bazerman, author of The Power of Noticing, warns about ignoring inconvenient evidence, about complacency when things are going well. I believe that effective organizations prioritize creativity by providing time and space and encouragement for creative, out-of-the-box people. Let me give you some examples. You'll recognize them. The Concordia Language Villages, the product of very creative people. First Jerry Huckable, then Dale Birkness, and now Christine Schultz. And college leaders who had the good sense to support and encourage them. Or look at the Healthcare Administration Program, the brainchild of the late Ted Highmark. Or think of the contributions of the late Paul Christensen to the choral life of our church and our nation. Or Hiram Drocky's contributions to our understanding of the history of this region. Or Karis and Communiversity, the progeny of Jim Pomperning. Or the student leadership innovations of Dean Morris Lanning. Or the May Seminars, another of Dale Birkness's ideas. Or the Offutt School of Business, the result of a generative process led by our beloved Pam Jolliker. Or the National Book Awards affiliation formed out of the initiative of Scott Olson and Tracy Moorhead, and the list could go on. But you get the idea. Successful organizations privilege and practice the generative principle. And before I leave this topic, I share with you that what I enjoy most about leadership, and I think most leaders will say this, is the generative dimension. It's really fun to think about the future, to think about your organization, to anticipate new ways in which you can do your work, and new ways in which you can serve your constituents, and new ways in which you can embody your mission. This is exciting, exciting work. But back to the reality principles. We have, I think that's assessment, right, the assessment principle. Strong organizations know what and who are working effectively. They will not survive, much less succeed, without rigorous attention to performance. Are we meeting our goals? Is the strategic plan on schedule? Is our financial plan working? Are people playing well with one another? How is our market changing, and are we responding effectively? And the list goes on. The character principle is another dimension of the assessment principle, but I set it out separately because everything else rests on it. Character is about our mission and our values. Are we living them? Do our actions match our words? Jim Collins has a book on this subject, How the Mighty Fall. He identifies the derailers: arrogance, neglect, the undisciplined pursuit of more, confusing big with great, denial, and desperation. Any one or any combination of these may lead to organizational confusion or dysfunction or failure. I think of many colleges, once clear and comfortable with their religious identity, that camouflaged and then diminished that identity for the sake of enrollment or popularity or financial support. It's the result of a failure in institutional character. In contrast, Concordia's faithfulness to its mission and the neighborhood it serves is exceptional and an example of enduring character. Jim Collins observes that many successful organizations experience tough times, and great organizations will be strengthened because of them. It begins with character, that is, mission and values, and then our capacity for organizational change. And this leads me finally to the renewal principle, and it's not on your screen. I take Collins' observations as an argument for, among other things, continuing attention to organizational mission and values. It's not enough to revisit them every decade and then print them up in the handbook. They need to be cultivated and sorted, illustrated and re-examined almost continuously if they are to retain their relevance and impact on the organization. And leaders, more than anyone else, are responsible for ongoing organizational renewal. It's not a sideline leadership function. It's at the core of what leaders are called to be and to do. I believe this has been and continues to be a distinguishing mark of this college. This place tends to its mission and values scrupulously. It is what accounts for the loyalty of our constituents and the unity of the community even in challenging times. It is a great gift, mediated by God's own Spirit. As many of you know, one of my favorite metaphors is restlessness. Inspired by the biblical story of Jacob wrestling with an angel, I believe restlessness is a gift, and it is what makes life interesting and productive. And it's what keeps good organizations alive and effective. So I close with a quotation from one of my favorite theologians, the late Joseph Sittler. He wrote, "Our whole life is an effort to approach, to appreciate, to some degree to participate in the absoluteness of God Himself. But we never can do it. That is why our whole life is restlessness. This restlessness may make us want to throw in the towel or pull up our socks. You can play it either way. One of the goals of the Christian message is to join together the people of the way of an eternally given restlessness, and to win from that restlessness the participation in God, which is all that our mortality can deliver. And that, I submit, is quite a lot." Thank you.
To respond to Dr. Dovre's message are two of our wonderful colleagues, Mark Ritchie, who worked under Dr. Dovre for a few years, and Leanne Wolf, who's one of our Lorentszen speakers in the fall. Leanne, where are you? Ladies first, says the feminist.
How many of you would like to be up here instead of me? Yeah, I was so honored, humbled, and petrified to be asked to do the response. So, you know, when you receive the notes from Dr. Dovre, and there are 18 principles, and you are asked to respond to those. It is just a titch overwhelming to think, how do I do this? And what kept coming back to me over and over and over again was the story when Jesus was approached by the Pharisees, and they said, so which is the greatest commandment? And he said, love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that second commandment is all about leadership. And so I would like to use that in my response as a way to unlock the principles. First of all, it is often talked about in terms of the golden rule. Treat others as you would have them treat yourself. Personally, I think that is insufficient and inappropriate for a leader. If you want to do that, you're a manager. Don't kid yourself. Because treating everyone like you want to be treated is you're going to treat them all the same. And that's not what a leader is. A leader is someone who looks at each individual and recognizes their strengths, their challenges, their hopes, their dreams as different. And my mom was actually the first leader I learned this from. She's got 9 kids. And I learned early on from her, none of you are alike. Each of you I have to approach differently to get your best. I don't expect the same from any one of you. That does not mean she was unfair. She was absolutely fair. She was consistent, but she didn't treat us the same. And that's what great leaders do. Great leaders look for the uniqueness in the people around them, and they treat them differently and expect high things of them consistently. And that also brings me to loving our neighbors as ourselves means there are certain values that we automatically express to the people around us. And those values include, first and foremost, integrity. We are true to ourselves, and we are true to each other, and we are honest. And I think it's important when we talk about love to remember it's not squishy. It's not the rose-colored glasses kind of love that we talk about, especially with Valentine's Day coming up. It is the love that enables us to be honest, even when it's hard. That also means we are respectful, which is another critical value of a leader. And being respectful doesn't mean that we don't tell the hard truth. We do tell the hard truth. And we do it in the kindest way possible, but we speak the truth. And that's what we are called to do as leaders. And I think that with these two together, there's another part about loving our neighbors as ourselves. And that is, we are called to work together. There is no greater joy than accomplishing something wonderful as a part of a team. And that collaboration is absolutely critical. And this is where I'm just going to challenge Dr. Dovre just a little. I don't think we push that collaboration down far enough in our organizations. I think there is a tendency to keep the thought that we collaborate at the senior level and we expect teamwork from the people who work in the trenches. And I want to challenge every one of you who think of yourselves as a leader to think about pushing that collaboration down and up and across an organization, because you work with smart people, and there are smart people who are the janitors, and there are smart people who are the servers, and there are smart people who are in the corner office, and sometimes the smartest one isn't in the corner office. So that's where humility comes in, and collaboration. So there are lots of buzzwords out there that aren't worth their salt anymore because they've become catchphrases. And one of those is actually servant leadership. We talk about it a lot, and I want to challenge all of us to think about servant leadership in the way it was originally intended, and what we're called to do with this commandment, to love our neighbors as ourselves. And that is to remember that as leaders, we are first and foremost called to serve the people we guide and lead, and to expect the best of ourselves and of them. And together, there is nothing we can't accomplish when we join our hands. Thank you.
Preach the gospel at all times. Use words if necessary. This well-known quote is widely attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, yet it's interesting scholars and historians who've documented his work find little evidence that he actually used this phrase. Still, I think it's appropriate to use this quote to begin my response to Paul's eloquent reflection on his leadership of Concordia College. For just as the Apostle Paul, after his conversion, devoted his life to preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, our Paul Dovre, has evangelized the gospel not only through his words, but through his leadership. He has done this in a way that so clearly exemplifies vocational call, a call to serve Concordia College. And beyond Concordia, his family, his church, society. I've been at Concordia since 1987, and while my students think that's forever, my almost 30 years at the college is only about half of Paul's 60 years of affiliation with Concordia. And so even though I am what I will call one of Paul's junior colleagues, let me be so bold as to offer these words that reflect how I frame the many dimensions of leadership that Paul shared with us today. Paul's various aspects of leadership find their connection in my mind with the first of his faith principles, what he termed the creation principle and described as the foundation of his faith. Genesis 1 reveals that we are created in the imago Dei, in the image and likeness of God. This truth of our creation by a God who created everything, of course, does not suggest that we share the physical appearance of God, for God is not bound by time or space. Rather, it reveals that we are created in the image and likeness of God's love, a love that is expressed in the mystery of the Trinity, and a love that calls us to love God and in turn reflect the image of God, who is love, to the entire world. The phrase, preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words, reflects an understanding of being created imago Dei. At all times, we are to reflect the love of God. When Paul describes his leadership with faith principles such as creation, redemption, and vocation, with leadership principles such as cultivate, discern, and partner, with organizational principles such as hedgehog, generative, and character, I put to you that these principles find their unity in the principle of love. And by the way, we didn't coordinate our responses. Paul loves Concordia, its people, its mission. He loves his family. He loves his church. Paul's leadership principles, Paul's life principles come together as a response to God's call for us to live as best we can, reflecting the image and likeness of God. God, who is love. Other business leaders who have spoken during Lorentszen luncheons have reflected on how they integrate their faith with their leadership of business enterprises. I think of such examples as Steve Scheel and Howard Dahl and Sister Thomas Welder. They each in their own way witness to us how as leaders, they are guided by a call to reflect God who is love. Those speakers, along with Paul today, exemplify leaders who live lives seeking to integrate faith in leadership. This has resulted, as Paul suggested in his comments, in situations of paradox and experiences of the cross. But in a day when some voices called for a separation of faith from the public square, Paul and others push back with personal witness to the great strength a leader has when leadership is grounded in faith in God. Our awareness that life is a gift given by God, a gift given out of divine love, is a key part of vocational discernment. What Paul listed as his first leadership principle, discerning our gifts, is connected to the creation principle. Our free response to God's gift of life, a gift of love, is to be a gift for others. Paul Dovre integrates his faith in leadership because he experiences the love of God, and in turn reflects love by being a gift to others. Is he always loving? Well, I have seen Paul when he's saddened, when he's troubled, and when he's angry. But I've seen Paul when he's joyful, content, or determined. In the end, when I reflect on Paul Dovre's leadership, I believe that the foundation of his leadership is his love of God and his vocational response to reflect that love in the world by living a life being a gift to others.
Now we have a few minutes for those people who have burning questions they would like to ask Dr. Dovre. Dr. Dovre, will you come back to the stage? Anyone have a question?
Thank you, Leanne, and thank you very much. I don't know who you were talking about, but it was nice. I want to answer a question that I've been asked lately, and that question is, how do you size up things at the college today? And so I want to say something about what I don't know and what I do know. What I don't know the facts on the ground. I haven't been here for over 4 years. And what the realities are today, I don't know. But I do know who is on the leadership team at Concordia today. And I have great confidence in them. They are people of wisdom. They are people of experience. They are people with imagination. I am really pleased, proud that we have such leadership in place at Concordia today. And the leadership of the Board of Regents is likewise deep, well qualified. You need sturdy leadership in days like these. Leaders who have character and clarity and imagination and strength to do difficult things. We have such leaders. I also know this college is not in financial trouble. It is taking the steps it is today to stay out of financial trouble. That's a whole different thing. They're not trying to bail out, they're trying to stay healthy, and they will. I'm confident with the plans that are coming along. I also know that we have perhaps never had a stronger faculty or academic program than we have today. We are really poised to serve our constituents and our students and society at large. And it's a faculty that continues to improve, continues to strengthen academic programs, to look for new opportunities. So wait and see. There is that generative principle going on in a continuing way. I also know we have a strong fundraising program that's been breaking records, and I know that we're going to be beginning a major renovation the science facilities in the spring, that's really all very good news. So those are my reflections, and I hope that they give you the same confidence that they give me as I think about the college's future.
Thank you, Dr. Dovre, for sharing from your vast wisdom. And thank you all for coming today and for engaging with us. I hope we shall see you next month where's Prakash? Right there. That's our speaker next month, whom we're borrowing from NDSU. Maybe you notice there's a few NDSU people around today. We're good neighbors. So we'll see you next month, and thank you very much.